And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you loved it so much that you came back for more. Folks, that was a brilliant decision because we have more. We have a lot more for you. We have a fantastic guest here today. You're going to love listening to this gentleman. I love this podcast. You will too. And the reason that he's here is because this is the podcast that's about podcasters. It's for podcasters and it's done by podcasters. And my guest is a podcaster. You guys cracked the code. Folks, this is the place where we all come together to lift each other up. And this is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So let's get sailing and bring in our guest today. Uh, this gentleman, almost 85 years young, and you wouldn't believe it talking to him, CEO. He's a bodybuilder. He has had multiple awards over here. I mean, the list of accomplishments for this gentleman is as long as my arm. I want to point out a couple, though, because they're incredible. He was awarded the Honorary Doctorate of Laws by the University of Northern British Columbia. He was inducted into the prestigious Order of British Columbia, which is the highest civilian order in the province. These are big deals. This is amazing. In addition to all that, he's the author of 5 books, the most recent, $1 billion Communication Skills, and he's the host of the hit podcast On the Brink. Folks, I mean, I'm already excited. I hope you are too. Please welcome to the show, John Brink. John, brother, how are you today?
Pleasure being here, Rory.
Thank
So
you.
I look forward to our discussion about podcasting in particular, close to my heart, close to yours.
Yeah, for sure. John, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. What are you about? What brings you here today, man?
My background, Rory, is that I was born in 1940, as you indicated. So it makes me nearly 85, 2 months away, actually, and grew up during the Second World War. Which was tough and rough. In northeastern Holland, we saw farmers that we should have seen, and still affects me in regards to PTSD, still very much with me, and the inner child, the fear of using a parent or the parent,
Hmm.
and so and then remembering, and particularly in 1944, it was the hunger year where the Germans had cut off all food supply to Holland. And my brother, my sister, and myself, every morning we would go with gunny sacks into the railroad yards to pick up anything edible and burnable. And so the
Wow.
reason that we did is that the Germans wouldn't shoot us. They would boot us one, but we'd be back the following day. So I still remember that. I still, even now, 80 years later, I can still feel the feeling of hunger. And the winter of 1944-45 was the coldest on record, as
Hmm.
well as in Holland. And obviously, I can still feel the cold and the heat, and a little room in the house blocked off kept it hot, too hot on the one side and cold in the back, really. And I can still feel that part. And so, it was a tough go. And then in April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army that were part of the Allied forces
Hmm.
that landed in Normandy in June of 1944. The USA, Canada, and the UK to liberate Holland
Hmm.
and Western Europe and to defeat the German army, and they did that successfully. And so, as a result of that, the Canadians went through France, Belgium, then the west part of Holland, and we lived in the north eastern part of Holland. And so it was rough going, and because of all the other circumstances, a lot of young people died, a lot of older people died because of cold and hunger and the combination of all of that. We saw, as I said earlier, far more than we should have. So
Yeah.
the my dream was to go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I tried to go when I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me then. They say too young, and so. Uh, I was then drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years, and then after that came out, wanted to work for at a furniture factory, and then had the dream still of going to Canada, and then Academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade three, and then I failed grade seven three times. So at 12 and a half years old, I started working at the furniture store as a factory and at a very young age. So, but and then had the dream of going to Canada, but the other dream was to build my own lumber mill.
Really?
And as I said earlier, I was going to go when I was 17. They
Hmm.
wouldn't let me then. And so then I went when I was 24. And at 24, left Holland, flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada because I wanted to go to the place where the timber is, and that's in British Columbia. And so I went on the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that is a long way. Anyway, so I arrived in Vancouver, went to the immigration office there, and I couldn't speak the language. And so fortunately, there was a German fellow working there, and I told him I could speak a little bit of German, and I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, "Go to Prince George. That's where they're building the mills, and that's where all the timber is." So I did, and so I went with a bus, 12 hours, 13 hours, Greyhound bus to Prince George 60 years ago. That's right here. I had a suitcase, three books, two sets of clothes, very little money. And so when I came off the bus in Prince George, I had my three books, two sets of clothes, counted my money at least three times. I had exactly $25.47. But what I did have lots of attitude, no matter what happens, I'm always positive. I avoid negative. I will not tolerate it around me. Passion, no matter what I do, is I give it 125%. Work ethic, I work harder even now at 85 than anybody. I still get up at 5:30 in the morning. I make my bed and I always think I'm late. And so that's what I'm doing. And so started out as a cleanup man, then became a limo pilot. And yes, I did get my own mill and a number of other companies. So today I have four silos. The one silo in is lumber manufacturing. I have mills in northern British Columbia. The other silo is warehousing, distribution, and logistics. We're probably the largest warehousing company in northern British Columbia. And then the other one is real estate, residential, commercial, and industrial, and be one of the biggest ones there in northern British Columbia as well. And the fourth one is about media. And I'm an
Ah,
author, I'm a public speaker, I'm a very active podcaster, and so I'm close to 1 million subscribers on YouTube, actually 920,000 or so, I believe, and and do hosting as well as guesting, and mainly guesting and some hosting. I think I've done about 435 or so where I'm the host, and about 200, 250 where I'm guesting on somebody else's podcast. And so, so that's kind of what I do. And then here, my daily life is I'm active in all these things. I'm also interested in coming back to something that I found by coincidence when I walked into a bookstore here in Prince George in 1997. After I was here for 32 years, was a book, and the book is in my studio. I'm sitting in the boardroom of one of my companies today,
mhm.
being a guest on your show. Is that I picked up a book, and the book's title was Driven to Distraction. And I had no idea what it was about. It was about ADHD. And I I had never even heard of ADHD. And the more I read about it, the more I started to understand it. I wrote in the book actually, now I finally know who I am. And so, and I believed after reading, looking at Google, and now at that point, I was 57 years old. It took me 5 years to go to my dog that delivered our two daughters and was a family dog and a friend. And he said to me, "Hey John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And I do. And so the more I saw about it, Rory, the more I believed it's a superpower. And a lot of people say to me now, how do you do all the things that you do? You write all these books and you have 10 companies and you do the podcasting and on and on and on and on. I said, it's ADHD. That's how I do it. And so, so that became a very major event in my life to discover that all the challenges that I had. Can you imagine this? I left school after failing grade 3 and failing grade 7 3 times, and then once home again. And people said to my parents, who were beautiful people, they said, "What are we going to do with this guy?" And they said, "Send him." Other people said, "Send him to the mentally challenged school." He said, "No, we're not going to do that." So we get him a job in a furniture factory. And so that's, as I told you earlier,
Yeah.
that's what happened. And it served me well. But then looking back, it took me till I was 62 years old that I was diagnosed with ADHD. So for 50 years, I was always wondering, who am I? Why am I different? And so until I did find out about it, it changed a lot of things in my life. I started writing books at my companies, started growing because now I knew who I was. And at the same time, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I started first blogging, then gradually got into some form of interacting between people on the local television station. And then COVID came. And then we
Mm.
said, now what do we do now? And then I had an apartment building that was in downtown Prince George. I said, let's make that a studio. And so that's what we did. Started podcasting from there, first local and regional, joined an organization called PodMatch that matches different people from around the world with other people that I have complementary to them.
Mhm.
And so we did that about 3, 4 years ago. And since that time, I've been very, very active in podcasting. Probably do at least 3 or 4 podcasts a week where I'm hosting, and probably one or two where I'm guesting a week. And so I'm at about 435 where I've been a host, and then probably another 200 or 250 where I've been guesting. And so, and then on YouTube, we are approaching 1 million subscribers. So
Mm.
that's kind of where things are today.
That's amazing. I mean, just the stuff that you've done, um, just the stuff you've done in the podcasting world, not alone, let alone everything else. The you mentioned ADHD is a superpower for you, and I'm curious, what you meant by that. How
Yes,
how is that a superpower for you and everything you've been able to accomplish?
that's a very, very good question. Is that it was always a question in my mind to come out through a difficult time, the war years, still have PTSD relating to that, the inner child, and then not being successful, although my siblings were doing well, but I was the exception. And so failed grade 3, failed grade 7 3 times, and always wondered, kids are hard on each other. And I then, at 12 and a half years old, the friends that I had, all of a sudden, they went on to college and university, and I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down at. And then I kind of felt that my dream of being liberated by the Canadian Army in April the 12th, 1945, my dream was to go to Canada. But not only that, to go to Canada and build my own lumber mill and start with nothing. Couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. But even then, still, for a long time, I was wondering, who am I? Why am I different? And so I was not a good communicator at that point either. I could interact well with people around me in my companies, maybe two, three people, but not in a larger group until somebody suggested to me in actually 1990 or 1989, maybe, ex-sister-in-law. She said, "Why don't you go with me to Toastmasters?" I said, "Well,
Uh,
what do they do there?" To develop communication skills. And I said, "Are you going to ask me questions?" He said, "No, just sit there and just see if you like it." So in the middle of the meeting, somebody said, "Hey, John, tell us all about you." I said, "Oh my God, I'll never go back here." So, but I did. I stayed there for 10 years. And for those people that say, "Well, what is Toastmasters all about?" Google it. There's probably a Toastmaster club in North America in your community, and it's about communication skills. And without going too far into it, it's all on Google, is that the most important part about Toastmasters is become a good listener. And then the second one is to speak on your feet in a articulate manner of knowing the topic and giving coordinated responses. And then the third one likely is preparing presentations.
yeah,
And then some other topics like becoming a good running meetings and those kind of things as well. So it is very, very helpful to a lot of people.
sure.
And probably around the world, there are probably 10 million people that have been part of Toastmastering in some form of fashion. It has been around for about 30 years. And
Yeah,
then probably less than one half of 1% go to the level of becoming a distinguished Toastmaster. People go as long as they feel they need to or want to, and then I want all the way to the very top. And so I became a distinguished Toastmaster, and that part changed my life. And so the combination of all of the other ones, the amazing part about Rory, about me was that even in grade three, already in grade seven, obviously. I was always very good at numbers, and still am very, very good in anything related to finances and numbers of all descriptions. And the
yeah.
other part was that I'm a very good writer, but I'm also have dyslexia. So I'm dyslexia in ADHD combination, not unknown really. And actually the author of the book that I found, Driven to Distraction, is a fellow by the name of Ellerberg, and he has written 18 books, is a professor and a doctorate, is ADHD and has dyslexia and
Hmm.
and is very well known globally.
When did you realize that you had the dyslexia with the ADHD?
That came a little bit after, but it always has been a challenge to me until I started realizing it that, yeah, that is still an issue. With all the books that I do all audios on them actually, and it always takes me much longer than it would for somebody else. So it became obvious that I didn't realize that right at the time, but the more I started understanding not only ADHD, but the other issues directly, indirectly related to it, there's no question about me having dyslexia.
Wow.
The other part, obviously, to understand when I became aware of being ADHD, and after I read the book in 1997, when I was 57 years old, I wrote in the book, now I finally know who I am, but I wrote it in Dutch because there was a stigma still attached to being ADHD, suggesting it was a mental deficiency of some sort. And and you know, and so and I already was building my companies. And can you imagine? I go to the bank, make a very good presentation, and for millions of dollars to set up all the companies, and then say after I give them the presentation, oh, by the way, I got a mental disorder called ADHD. They would say, "Have a nice day."
Right.
Not now, obviously, but still, its frequency of occurrence globally is probably approaching 30% of the populations.
Hmm.
In my mind, no question about that. And that is equal between males and females, although females presented differently than males do. But it is very, very common uh, and right globally.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's an awful lot to overcome. I mean, all the way around. The entire story of your life is about overcoming adversity here. So,
And so I felt I had to write a book about it,
mhm.
ADHD Unlocked. Very,
Unlocked.
very popular book. Yeah.
Nice. Is that your personal journey you wrote about then?
Uh, it's the book that I wrote and substantially about myself,
Yes.
but also touching on other issues like our educational systems. And I presume you're in the United States somewhere.
That's correct. Yeah.
And obviously, I'm in Canada. I
Hmm.
believe the issues are similar in the United States as they are in Canada. Our educational system has really not incorporated the issues relating to any form of mental issues that are not commonplace or not recognized as such. ADHD is one where we are not teaching our the people that are, I say, have the benefit of it in a way in my life, but are affected by it, and so it's still in progress. How do we deal with it? I touch on that in this book actually, in saying that we must change our teaching system where we, in particular as it relates to ADHD issues, but also others, is where the conventional learning system where we put somebody in a classroom for 3 or 4 years is really not an effective way of teaching people. And particularly as it relates to skill sets. And so I touched on the area of micro certification, suggesting in a lot of cases that if, if somebody is sitting in a classroom for 4 years, it probably takes them less than 6 months focusing on the skill sets they are developing and focusing on those first and foremost and adding the others as secondaries that are helpful,
Hmm.
but not the other way around.
Wow. Well, so you're an advocate for the ADHD, movement at this point. You're
No,
trying to get change
no
in it.
question about that.
Yeah.
No
Wonderful.
question about it. Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, we need more of that. Absolutely. I did not realize that you had dyslexia too on top of that. I mean, those two things together, I mean, that would make seventh grade pretty difficult.
Yeah, but obviously, in spite of that, some people I do a lot of presenting, not on these issues, on many other issues, and I'm a very active public speaker.
Hmm.
And then demand is that uh, I some of the presentations, recent one, and some other ones that you say, are you still feeling? You still have issues with failing grade 7 3 times? I said, yeah, I do. Still bothers me. I
Yeah.
should have left earlier.
Hmm. Yeah.
Tongue in cheek somewhat, but the point that
Right.
I'm making, the schooling system as it existed was not helpful to me at all
Right.
because I could sit in school and for a whole afternoon. And if you ask me, tell me, even give me 5 minutes of what they talked about it, I would not be able to do it because I was simply not there.
Yeah. Well, and back then they had no idea how to find that stuff out. They really didn't have screening procedures for it.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And
So, but
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and yet you still managed to get your lumber mill.
No, no, far beyond that,
Oh,
that I'm a very popular author, obviously. I'm an in-demand speaker. I've done well on podcasting, approaching probably in another month or so, I'd be at 1 million subscribers on YouTube.
yeah,
And so there must be something that I've learned. So my classic education was the unconventional way. So leaving the structured learning didn't serve me well, and doing my own did. And so, and I still do that even today. And, and then to a certain extent, I'm not spend all my time on ADHD. I just bring it up when the occasion
sure,
happens where it is appropriate, like in this one.
sure, for sure. Now, we mentioned you got your lumber mill, you got other companies. A lot of that makes sense,
Right.
especially the way you grew up and what your goal was. What made you want to get into the media aspect of everything, in terms of the writing and the podcasting and everything else?
Yeah, good question, Roy. Is that because of I have had an interesting life, obviously, from the war years all the way to the schooling or the difficulties and the challenges, and then starting businesses from the ground up. Because when I started my first operation here, this mill, I'm sitting in their boardroom. Is Brink Forest Products is one of my companies. I started it exactly 50 years ago with 3 employees. I worked 16 hours a day as long as I could stay awake, and then gradually build it up to a company that is sizable now. And so usually has around 400 employees or so. And
Nice.
so people say to me, you should write a book about it. But writing books is not easy, not only to me because of the circumstances, but for anybody. What should it look like? What's the font? How do you go about it? Blah, blah, blah. So for 20 years, I started, I stopped, I started, I stopped until about 6, 7 years ago. I said, if I don't do it now, it will never happen. So I started writing. I wrote this book, Against All Odds, and
Hmm.
it is 80 years of my life, living it, 20
Nice.
years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And again, very, very popular. And then, from there on in, I made it a point to virtually every year write a book. And then the one of the, not the last one, but the one before is this one. I'm also very much into fitness and health. And that's a picture of me at nearly 85. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. So
Wow.
in 2018, I qualified for Northern BC bodybuilding and physique. The next thing I qualified the same in the province of British Columbia, then on the national, as well as for the Arnolds. And then
Uh,
COVID came, and now again, I'm training as we speak. Just came from the gym, actually. Again, I'm getting ready to compete in the Arnolds.
nice. Nice. That's the Arnold Classic, right? Is that
Correct.
what they
Yeah.
still call it? Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. All right, wonderful. Well, I mean, good luck with that. That's fantastic. When's that competition?
In 2026.
I see. Okay. All right. How long is your training cycle for that? Is it, 9 months, 12 months? I'm just curious.
I train all year,
Mm,
so 3 or 4 days a week. I'm into heavy training. I stay fit. Diet is important. I'm very conscientious of diet and fitness, and the whole objective is not that I wanted to be a bodybuilder, but that at some point this is a shock that happens to people in their lives, and so in 2008 I had a case of diverticulitis. I'm not sure if you've familiar with what that is.
yeah.
If it is on the right side I'm not a doc. The right side of your body, if you have pain, is probably appendix, and on the left side is your colon. And it was a rupture, in my case, a rupture of the colon, and that is extremely delicate. And by the time I got to the hospital and got operated on, took 20 centimeters of my colon, and the doc said, you came this close. And so then I
Oh,
knew my wife is a vegetarian and I didn't listen as well as I could have. I was not abusive in terms of diets and all the other kind of things, but I'm not quite as good as I could have. And so then I knew I had to, be careful with that. So I started to follow my diet. I'm probably 80-20 now and go to the gym and get a trainer because I was no different than a lot of other people did is that at the end of the year, I'm going to do this, that, and then I'm going to buy a membership at the gym. And
right,
then after 2 weeks, then I can find 100 reasons why I'm too busy to go to the gym.
right.
And so I didn't, my life, I'm not trying to be important, it's all appointments. So I got a trainer. So, and since 2008, nearly for 16, 17 years, I've gone to the gym. I've been training. After about 6 years, somebody said, and I was already in my mid to late 60s. Hey, John, have you ever thought about competing? I said, me? Yeah. I said, well, why not? So, and then I started getting ready. And then the next thing, I started, competing in bodybuilding and physique with the results that I just said. And
Yeah.
even now, I still look like this. And then my diet is very, very important, so I'm very, very careful with diet. What I do is I take you through it quickly. I'm not a doc, obviously, but in the mornings, the first thing that I do when I get up, I drink 10 ounces of water.
Okay.
Then I have a very careful diet initially. I have three boiled eggs or four and an avocado. And then during the daytime, I may mid-morning have a protein drink, a boost of one of those.
Okay.
Then I'm careful if I go to the gym, then I have a protein drink there with double protein. That's my lunch. Do another protein drink mid-afternoon. And then in the evening, usually I have some protein rich. I may have salads with chicken. I do some fish and chicken. And then that's kind of what I do. And then I try to sleep between 7 and 9 hours a night. And
Wow.
and
Yeah.
and so that works for me. And that's what
Nice.
I do.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for success right there. I mean, especially the 7 to 9 hours of sleep. That sounds great.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, good luck in that. I'll be,
Yes.
be looking for you in the next Arnold up there. That's beautiful. All right, love it. So the media project then, all right, is something that you got into to kind of, further yourself, further your career, further the other businesses.
Yeah, the media part is that I was really intrigued by podcasting
Hmm.
because I'm a presenter. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do in my books. I'm a storyteller. The same when I'm podcasting. I'm a storyteller. I have a lot of experience and working with Podmatch in particular, we have a lot of people obviously that are interested in our podcasting. The podcasting that I do, where I'm the podcaster, and then as I said earlier, that's mainly what I do. But I'm also guest on a number. I usually do three and two or four and two a week,
Nice.
and
Nice.
I
No,
I like it. I enjoy it.
yeah.
All kinds of topics. Whatever happens, happens. The other part that I do that I may be different from others, Rory, is that I did a podcast this morning here in BC at 9 o'clock. My podcasts are usually in an hour.
Okay.
And we say right at the podcast, I'm not editing it. It is what it is. And I release it in 4 hours.
Nice.
So that podcast right now is already out there that I did this morning.
I love that. I love that. I love that you just said that. Thank you so much for saying that because you just backed up what I've been telling my students for years. I love it. I think people spend way too much time editing.
And that's and so then with all due respect, I get people that guess me, and then out of curiosity, I say, "When are you going to play this?" They said, "Well, let me see in September." I said, "What year, really?" So and so, but I'm not suggesting that everybody should do what I do, but of all the podcasts that I've done, approaching this one was 433 or 434. 434. Scott just said like this, 434. So I don't think of any of the podcasts I have edited. I nearly did once because as I was introducing the guest, all of a sudden the whole building started shaking. And I said, "Oh my," I didn't swear. I said, "Oh my God, what's happening?" It said we had an earthquake,
Oh, wow.
4.3 or 4.4. So then we said, "Should we take it out?" I said, "No, leave it in." And that's what I do. It is what it is.
Right.
And that's the way I've done it with all my podcasts. But we want to get them out as quickly as we can.
Nice. No, I love that as a procedure. That makes a lot of sense. Now, the way that I've listened to your podcast, and I know you have some guests on there. And how does your podcast fit into the rest of your businesses? What purpose does the podcast serve in terms of furthering you and your business?
Yeah, very good question. Indirectly, it raises my profile.
Nice. Okay.
Right? So because and again, I can say that here. I'm not bragging about it.
Right.
I'm one of the most successful podcasters, obviously in Western Canada, approaching a million subscribers on YouTube,
Hmm.
and meaning that on the other platforms combined, it probably will approach a couple of million at least globally. And we have no shortage of getting the best because obviously what attracts others is that I have so many subscribers that the best want to be on my podcast because it gives them the exposure.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other part is I'm predictable. I'm not a cut you individual.
Hmm.
I like to work. I never quite know what will happen, and we'll deal with that as that happens in some form or fashion. But in some cases, as you know, what happens, I may have a guest that when I'm assuming he's going to not only answer a question, I don't read, it's all happens. I don't have a list that I'm reading. I don't do that.
Yeah.
But I look at their bio and I understand who they are, what they are, and I like to make it as much of a conversation between two friends as possible.
Yeah.
But every so often, I get somebody that I'm assuming not only will they answer the question, but they will kind of start going beyond that. And that sometimes happens, and we cannot have that space. So then I have to fill it in and making sure that it doesn't look obvious. And so those kind of things. And I'm used to that. So whatever happens, happens, and that's what we do. The topics are not about ADHD. They're not about, my books. They're not about, it is uncanny, Rory, how often it happens that I have a guest that during the podcast, I may bring up my books and ADHD and that I'm ADHD, and that during that conversation, the person will say, I haven't really talked to anybody about this, but I'm also ADHD, or I think I am, or my son is, my brother is, on and on, over and over and over and over again.
Wow.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
question about it.
Well, and when you bring it up, then they feel like it's a safe place for them to bring it up
And
about
that's the
themselves.
point.
Yeah,
That's the point.
exactly.
And so
Exactly.
what I'm saying is, I'm not ashamed of it. I don't, but I believe I have an obligation to
Mhm.
speak about it. I believe that with all the things that I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me. In fact, to the contrary, but I've seen it all from the war years, not having a dad that was drafted into the Dutch army, in the early part of the war. I didn't even know him, and for 5 years they didn't know if he lived or died. And so and then when he came back, was affected by PTSD and all of that stuff, and it affected the family. So
Yep.
all the stuff I've seen, I've gone through it, and then obviously, having failed grade 3 and grade 7 and all those things. The reason that I'm like to interact about it and talk about it is because I've gone through a major period in life up to the time that I was 62. And even including up to 1990. For 10 years I was in Toastmasters. I went through the period of who am I? And it was not until the period where the step of going to Toastmasters gave me confidence. And then the other one was in 1997, when I found a book of Dr. Halliwell about Driven to Distraction, that then I knew who I was. But for all that period, coming to Canada, and having to start over again and not being asked. And Holland, the way it would go is you get married, you're looking for a job, you're applying for a job, you want to go into business, have to talk to the banker. One of the questions is always, where are your diplomas? I didn't have any diplomas. And so here in Canada, nobody ever asked me that. And so when I started here with nothing, work my butt off, really, as long as I could stay physically awake. But, and so my foundation in life is right on this plaque that my employees gave me: attitude, passion, work ethic. What will follow is success. And I feel I have an obligation to share that with others that are wondering, am I good enough because of this, that, and the other thing, or is the ADHD or whatever it may be what you have, is that will that ever make me successful? I say yes, 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 you can. And I'm writing another book about that.
All
Is
right.
that you can. Everything is possible.
Love that.
And I'm
Nice.
going to be
Yeah.
the example. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It's a bit of a cliche, but I mean that in terms of, you know, all my books are connected. Against All Odds, ADHD, and then the other one is Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream. The other one is Living Young, Dying Old. And then the other one is so important to me is $1 billion in, communication skills. Now, the other part that is interesting about it, I want you to see if you can see. I'm just going to find the book. Can you see what the cost of this book is?
Mm, not from there. It's maybe if you lift it up a little bit more. I think it's at the bottom, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it looks like 25, is that dollars? $25, 47 cents.
yeah, it's this one. That's what I had in my pocket. So all my books are 25.47.
Nice. I like that. You brought up several times that a question that you've asked yourself is, who am I? And you've mentioned, at some point you finally found out who that was. For most of us, when we ask ourselves that question and we're trying to answer it, one of the first things that happens is we go to what our job is, or, what our last name is, or maybe, what our heritage is. Um, when you were asking yourself that question, you said you finally answered it. John, what did you find out? Who are you exactly?
The question for me is, why am I different than all the other ones? The friends in grade 7 at 12 years old
I
that were
see.
my friends and all of a sudden decided, no, John, we
I see.
don't want you. We used to go 8 to 10 kilometers on our bikes in Holland, as in a two side by side, two, and all of a sudden they said, no, you're no longer part of that, and so you're now a laborer. And then the other part that I had in living in northeastern Holland, we have a dialect that means High Dutch. Wouldn't understand my dialect. I loved dialect growing up speaking dialect. So when I was 17, I and went into the Air Force, I had to acquire the skill to speak High Dutch, but he always could hear my dialect beneath it and say, "Oh, he's a laborer. He comes from those are the laborers, the lesser than." And so, and then obviously, then the question of saying, what will happen as I grow up? I always remember this thing. It sounds a little bit silly, but I had a girlfriend. I was in love with her, when I was 17, 16, 17. I don't know. I was in love with her. And I still know her in a way. She lives in Holland, is married, and very infrequently when I go back to Holland, we say, "Hi, hello, how you doing?" Visit her husband and me. But I was in love with her. And then her family, her dad and mom and dad invited me to her house to have dinner with them. She was the only daughter. And so we barely sat down. And so dad said, "So, John, what do you plan to become?" Like saying, "Really? I told my daughter, don't hang out. He's a loser." Right. It's so obvious. And so I always remember that. But, that was not the only reason. But so what I am saying is that the question will always be, where are your diplomas? Why didn't you blah blah blah? So and so then why and then obviously why am I different was my question. And then I didn't have confidence, and that was indirectly relating to that until I, I'm not saying that I'm better than, but no less than. And so, and that's when the combination of circumstances I had not planned for, right? The Canadians liberating us, going to Canada became my dream, coming to British Columbia. And then my dream was to build a lumber mill to prove to me that I was just as smart, not to anybody else, but me.
Okay.
And so, and then even then, it took time until circumstances, the going to Toastmasters, and then in particular, finding ADHD.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what it was. And that combination of all of that knew that I'm okay. But I always stayed away. Attitude, passion, work ethic was always part of me. And so I will not be defeated. And so I stayed the course, and now I feel more than anything I have an obligation to share it with others, not to show them, "Look at John, how successful." No, no. I show it because I say everything is possible. And then the other part that I say when I make presentations to younger people, high schools, colleges, universities, I always say that we are collectively, respectfully, too preoccupied about what we look like, what we are wearing. This is not right. That's not right. This is not right. That's not right. I say there is only one of you, only one on this whole earth that is unique. And so that doesn't mean that you should not do things, but do not believe that you just are not good enough or don't look good enough. You are unique. And saying accept that as it is, and then go forward in terms of everything is possible. But you have
Yeah.
to believe. But it took me a long time until I could reconcile that.
Yeah.
And then being 50 years ADHD and not knowing it, the question was, why did I fail grade 3 and grade 7? It didn't make me lesser than. I don't think there would be anybody suggesting
No.
that so, but I have an obligation more than anything, Rory, in my mind.
Yeah. No, I understand. It's a great mission that you're on right now, and yeah, you can tell. I love it. Absolutely love it. In terms of the podcast and the way that it works, I want to make sure I get this question in because we do have a couple of podcaster folks who do listen, and they like to hear this kind of thing. So, the I get why you're doing your podcast and what it's about, and I've listened to it. I enjoyed some of the episodes that I got to listen to there. Um, as you're doing your podcast, and this is like my corny question that I ask everybody, when you're doing the podcast, what is it about doing the podcast that you love the most? And what is it about doing the podcast that you just absolutely hate the most?
That's an interesting question. And this sounds corny maybe, or how could it be? I love podcasting. I love it. And although I will become informed on the individual. I don't want to go on that I have no idea. Some people do, that maybe, but I don't do that. I want to be informed. I want to be speaking on the topic, whatever that may be, do as much research as I have to do to at least show the respect to my guest that I try to know more about them. And I want to know them personally, the family around them, or things that happen if they have the dog sitting on the side and it barks. I want all of that in it. And so I love podcasting. I love the surprise of it. And then the amazing things happen during my podcast. And I'm being honest and sincere. And this is me. I'm a storyteller.
Hmm.
And what I hate the most is that when people are not ready and that may be podcasting me as a guest. And so they really don't know who I am or what it is all about.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that they should know everything about me, but to make it interesting. And then I did another recent podcast that was kind of interesting. You may find that funny. It's never happened to me in my podcast number 433. So in, in Scottish City, he is smiling about it. He said, I'm surprised that you didn't tell him to. Yeah, but anyway, so the guy said, so I introduced myself and I'm doing the things that I normally do, and that's my guest, blah, blah, blah. And then I wanted to give him some idea of the things that I do. He has a book that came out and those kind of things. So, and I wanted to share with him that I'm also an author, and so that it gives more contents to who am I. And at one point I said, I don't know how much of my background you have watched. It kind of appeared to be not much. So then at one point he said, so can I ask you a question? Yeah. Is this my podcast about you, or is the podcast about my book?
What?
What? So I said, I said,
Okay.
then I had to swallow and do all these other kind of things. But I surprised myself. Scott will say, I cannot believe it because everybody else would have done differently. So, but I said that I believe what I was trying to do is give you a bit of a background on me so that it will help a conversation. I'm also an author, not better or lesser. That's not the issue, but so that you can better understand what I'm doing and what I believe would be helpful in our conversation. And so then that I said, and then I said, okay, let's talk about your book. And so we did, and then from there and then the podcast got was quite good actually, and he gave it a 5 star, I believe. So but so
At some point you just hit click. It's like, okay, this is over. Thanks a lot.
yeah. So and I will not do that. And so
Yeah.
because what I do is Scott and was quite surprised about it because a lot of people no, I said I'm not going to do that. So I it is what it is, and it is my challenge. If I want to be who I want to be, whatever happens, I would deal with it. So, and at least up to now, I don't know what's going to happen next, but you
Right.
know, so those, so to answer your question, this one was kind of interesting. But in your question is, I like podcasters that where I'm a guest that at least they have a basic idea of who I am, and if they're reading off a list, I don't particularly like that much. And then if they tell me that this podcast will be shown 2 months from now, I don't think that's helpful, So, but then again, I'm not saying that they should or they shouldn't, but that. But I believe that podcasting, in my mind, Rory, is an amazing vehicle and platform that is still on its infancy. It is still growing, and I will, as long as I'm able and capable, I want to be part of it.
Nice. Very nice. Well, I certainly appreciate that. I always get great answers to that question. So I appreciate you, digging in and giving me your personal answers on that. Thank you. John, I love everything that you brought to the podcast today. You're an amazing story, an absolutely amazing story. I was really looking forward to talking to you today, and I was not disappointed. The podcast is great, and I really enjoyed listening to that. So I want to make sure that everybody out there knows you got to check out the hit podcast On the Brink with John Brink. But thank you for coming on the show, for giving us all of your time. Before I let you go, though, you're incredibly experienced. You're a wealth of knowledge. I want to make sure that I get one more thing out of you for the people who are listening. So, what advice do you have for podcasters that are out there who love it as much as you do, but who are just not quite where you are yet in the journey?
I would say do not get discouraged. Stay the course, be predictable. If you say you're going to be there, make sure you're there. And then give them the respect. We always recognize them before, we recognize them after, thanking them for being on our podcast, and be predictable. When we say we're going to podcast, and if I'm even running tight to my studio and getting there in time, I go out of my way being there. And then I try to be me. And then the other part is that I have another John A as in Aaron or Adam Brink BRINK.com has a lot of our information on it as well about the books and all the other kind of things. But I believe it. I believe it is an amazing, amazing podcast. I'm thinking about a platform right now that we will start probably in the next 3 to 4 months.
Nice. All right. Well, I look forward to hearing about that. That's going to be great. All right.
Yes.
Anything else you want to tell everybody about that? You want to tease them with something?
Yeah, so we will be very, very active. The podcast or the platform, we are now in the process of getting ready for it. That probably will be in probably this fall. And
Great.
so still a little bit early. We will keep you informed on it though. We'll probably start it slowly and then working up. But again, it comes to the same as podcasting. Do not look at somebody like me in terms of and all the other things around it is staying the course with everything that you do it well, don't give up. I did it with all the things that I do. Stay the course, never give up, and give it the best that you got. Attitude, passion, work ethic, what will follow is success. And that also applies to podcasting.
Wonderful message, John. I really appreciate it. And I love that you keep leading by example. So don't stop doing what you're doing, brother.
Okay, thanks, Roy.
All
I
right.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for
My
being
pleasure.
on. Folks, this
Thank
has
you.
been another fantastic episode of The Podcaster Nation with another absolutely magnificent podcaster, John Brink, host of On the Brink. Folks, this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And as you saw yet again today, this is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So keep sailing.